Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We've had a couple technical difficulties. Um, Welcome to the HRPP 2026 Spring Seminar Series. Today, we're talking about HIPAA, privacy, and confidentiality in human research. I'm joined today by Amanda Rasnack from IRBMED. She'll be starting off the seminar talking about IRBMED review of HIPAA authorizations, waivers, and alterations. Erin Kaliba will be joining us. Hopefully that's another technical difficulty we had, so I need to make sure that she can join. We've been in contact, but she'll be presenting after Amanda, talking about the doctor services for accessing participant data. And then I'll close out the seminar talking about some resources for HIPAA training, institutional policies for privacy, and emerging issues in research with human participants, specifically related to privacy concerns. And so we'll get started with Amanda. Thank you for your patience. And I would like to point out before we get started that we are recording. We'll make sure that a recording is available to everyone that's registered. We'll also send a copy of the slides to you, and we will have Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, please put those in Q&A. And thank you for joining this morning.
Hi, everybody. Let me share. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Rasnick. I'm a regulatory analyst at IRBMED on the expedited team. Today, I'm going to cover IRBMED's review of HIPAA authorizations, waivers, and alterations. As we all know, protected health information, or PHI, is individually identifiable health information, which is held or maintained by covered entities or business associates acting as such. PHI is subject to HIPAA privacy rule protections, which establish the conditions under which PHI may be used or disclosed by covered entities for research purposes. The use of PHI is defined as the sharing or utilization of it as long as the information remains within the entity that maintains it. Whereas the disclosure of PHI is defined as the release or divulging of the information in any manner outside of the entity that maintains it. Every use or disclosure of PHI for research must satisfy at least one of these provisions. The use or disclosure of PHI for research is permitted with a signed authorization from the individual or without individual authorization under these additional limited circumstances. Today, I'm going to focus mostly on the first two provisions, which include obtaining a signed authorization from a participant and or obtaining an IRB approved waiver of HIPAA authorization. The remaining provisions listed are typically associated with projects which are eligible for a not regulated determination. I will touch briefly on these later on. So IRBMED reviews the aspects of research related to privacy and confidentiality per requirements from OHRP, the FDA, and HIPAA. IRBs have the authority to consider and act upon requests for partial or complete waiver or alteration of the privacy rules authorization requirement for the uses and disclosures of PHI for research. The common rule and the FDA additionally require that there are adequate provisions in the protocol to protect the privacy of the research participants and to maintain the confidentiality of their identifiable data. Where the privacy rule requires patient authorization, voluntary consent is not sufficient to permit the use or disclosure of PHI unless it also satisfies the requirements of a valid HIPAA authorization. So to satisfy the requirements of a valid HIPAA authorization, the authorization must specify the number of PHI elements that are going to be used or disclosed, including descriptions, the person authorized to make the use or disclosure, the person who the PHI will be disclosed to, an event date an expiration date or event related to the individual or the use or disclosure. And then in some cases, the purpose of the use or the disclosure. So these required elements are a part of a number of IRBMED's informed consent templates, which combine the research informed consent document and the HIPAA authorization form. Section 9 of the Standard Informed Consent Template is a required element of informed consent, meaning it is required that potential participants are informed about the measures to protect the confidentiality of their records. But this section also includes the required elements of a valid HIPAA authorization form. The HIPAA authorization for research form is included in IRBMED standard, biorepository, one-time blood or specimen, survey, and eligibility informed consent document templates, which are all available for download on Research A to Z. That link is located at the bottom of the slide. HIPAA authorization is not included in the exempt informed consent template or the non-research consent templates, which are available for humanitarian use or expanded access purposes. Section 25 of the e-research application covers PHI and HIPAA. In 2511, IRBMED reviews to ensure the PHI elements listed here match the PHI elements listed in the HIPAA authorization for research form within the informed consent document. So this is a busy slide, but these are the PHI elements which are listed in the HIPAA authorization for research form within the informed consent templates. The left is a snip of section 9.2 of the standard consent template, and the right is an example of what the list looks like within the specialty consent templates. So again, we will ensure what's listed here on the consent matches what's listed here in section 25.1 or 25.1.1 specifically. So a key protection of the HIPAA privacy rule is referred to as the minimum necessary requirement. This is derived from confidentiality codes and practices in common use today. It is based on sound current practice that PHI should not be used or disclosed when it is not necessary to satisfy a particular purpose or carry out a function. 25.1.2 requires an explanation why the PHI identified in 25.1.1 is necessary for the research and why the study could not be reasonably and effectively conducted without it. This assures the IRB and the institution that PHI, which is not required by the current research, is not going to be used or disclosed. 25.1.3 indicates if HIPAA authorization for access to PHI will be obtained from all or just some of the participants. If you select yes, sometimes, or no, then a waiver for HIPAA authorization must be requested. If yes, sometimes is selected, then a partial waiver of HIPAA authorization would apply to either a part of the research activities or to a specific group of participants. If no is selected, then a full waiver of HIPAA authorization would apply to the entire project. A waiver of HIPAA authorization can cover the use of PHI for the entire project, which is most commonly seen in secondary use projects, whereas a partial waiver covers a portion of the research for which the use of PHI would not be practicable if patient authorization were required. So a waiver may be needed only for a survey portion of a project or for screening and recruitment purposes, for a specific subset of participants, or for any other portion or aspect of the project. Additionally, any of the HIPAA authorization requirements can be altered, so either modified or removed by the IRB. The most frequent HIPAA authorizations are requests for the removal of the requirement that the participant signs and dates the HIPAA authorization form and or removal of the requirement that the participant receives a copy of the signed or dated form. These alteration requests are typically seen in conjunction with waiver of documentation of informed consent requests, as there are no signatures being obtained from the participants. So these requests are made in 2521 of the e-research application. And then to request an alteration, you will select other portion or aspect of the project, and in the free text box add a statement that you are requesting an alteration and what type of alteration you are requesting. Then questions 2522 through 2526 reflect the criteria for a waiver or alteration of HIPAA authorization. The three criteria that must be met for full waivers, partial waivers, and alterations are all the same. So first, the use or disclosure of PHI must involve no more than minimal risk to the privacy of the individuals. Second, the research could not practicably be conducted without the waiver or alteration. And third, that the research could not practicably be conducted without access to and use of the PHI. So whether the use or disclosure of PHI involves no more than minimal risk to the privacy of individuals is based on at least the presence of the following three elements. There must be an adequate plan to protect the identifiers from improper use and disclosure, which is described in 2522. There must be an adequate plan to destroy the identifiers at the earliest opportunity, which is described in 2523. And there must be an assurance that the PHI will not be used or disclosed, which is described in 2524. And then in 2525, you are asked to explain why the research cannot practicably be conducted without the waiver and or alteration of HIPAA authorization. So practical means possible. It doesn't mean convenient. So, for example, if a subject is available to provide authorization, then it is usually practicable to obtain their authorization. But practicability should not be determined solely by considerations of convenience, cost, or speed. It is not the standard that obtaining HIPAA authorization is not practicable. It may be possible, but rather the criterion here is that the conduct of the research would not be practicable if HIPAA authorization was required for every use of PHI. In 2526, you are asked to explain why the research could not practicably be conducted without the access to and use of PHI. So again, the standard here is that the conduct of the research would not be practicable if access and use of PHI were not allowed. So I wanted to touch briefly on exempt and not regulated projects because it's important to note that HIPAA privacy rule protections apply to the use or disclosure of PHI for research purposes independent of other federal regulations on human subjects research. So IRBMED makes determinations regarding HIPAA compliance for exempt and not regulated projects involving PHI. Exempt research is human subjects research, but involves activities for which all the criteria for approval under 46-111 does not need to be met. Exempt human subjects research may require a waiver of HIPAA authorization with the use of PHI to identify eligible participants or the use of PHI to create a data set for research purposes. Activities not regulated as human subjects research do not meet the regulatory definition of research and or involving human subjects, and therefore do not require IRB oversight at any point. However, an e-research application is still indicated if review for HIPAA considerations are required. So, for exempt or not regulated projects, depending on the type of activity, HIPAA requirements may be satisfied by obtaining individual authorization or a waiver in the same manner as with non-exempt projects, or this is where the other provisions of limited or de-identified data sets, preparatory activities, or research involving the PHI of decedents may apply. And then the last item I want to cover is IRBMED's review of research-related unauthorized disclosures of PHI. So unauthorized disclosures of PHI in research might be incidental or accidental. For any known or suspected unauthorized disclosure of PHI related to research, the first thing you should do is immediately take any practicable steps necessary to limit the potential or ongoing harmful effects of the disclosure. You should promptly report the concern to corporate compliance, and you should notify IRBMED as soon as possible. So IRBMED is notified of these events through an e-research submission of an ORIO report, other reportable information or occurrence. This should be reported as an accident or incident. Please ensure to include whether the disclosure was or will be addressed and or corrected. And then any disclosures that place participants at a greater risk of psychological or social harm than was previously known or recognized should be reported as an unanticipated problem or UAP. The corporate compliance link in the slide takes you directly to their reporting system. And then more information about ORIOs, IRBMED's ORIO reporting guidelines, and UAPs can also be found at the link at the bottom of the slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. So if anyone has questions for Amanda, please put those in Q&A and we'll have those at the end of our session. Now, Erin Kaliba was able to join. Sorry about the technical difficulty, but take it away. Thank you so much for joining.
Hi, you guys. I like to have technical difficulties right before I give a somewhat technical talk because it gives you a real sense of confidence. I'm going to see if I can share. I think maybe we have to stop sharing this presentation to put up multiple. Could share. Let me just see. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. So.
Yes,
Can you see
thank
it,
you.
Rainy? Oh, great. Thank you. So it's really nice to be here with all of you, and it's really nice to follow Amanda too, because um, some of what the data office does is really stand on the shoulders of the IRB and corporate compliance. We are not IRB, we are the effector arm. So we take all that the common rule and the IRB lays forth for what researchers can and cannot do within the limits of human subjects research, and then we make data available in accordance with that. And so I'll reference a lot of what Amanda just presented to you. So this is kind of a nice order of events. But basically, I want to talk to you about some updates. You might be familiar with the data office already, and Maybe I'll tell you something new that we're working on, or maybe you're not familiar at all, and I'll share with you who we are. But the basics are that the data office, or DOCTR, is a acronym, is really about data access, infrastructure to analyze that data, and then governance. What you can access, who you can give it to once you get the data, where you can store it. So those are kind of the pieces of what our office does. And so we were set up in 2014 as an honest broker. We used to be called the Honest Broker Office, or HBO, but that there's another HBO out there that was much more fun than us. So we're the Honest Broker Office, and the first and last columns on this schema are really what we started as. We were data access, and I'll talk about that and how we've evolved a little, and we were data privacy. And so we'd look at the IRB, we'd look at a DUA, maybe if there are data sets coming from other institutions, or you're going to send Michigan medicine data out. Increasingly, we're focused on the two work streams that are in the middle: data curation. How do we make all the data available for researchers less raw, less cleaning time? How do we present it in views that are both maximizing the privacy of any patient identification and maximizing the utility of it for a researcher? And then data sharing, we help researchers share with industry, with network-based research, things like PCORI, just institution to institution. And so that's a lot of what we do too, is mapping Michigan medicine data to a national standard so that you can collaborate with other institutions. So what I said before was we really look through the lens of IRB and the lens of compliance to say, what can this researcher and her team have for this study, given what the IRB has reviewed and approved? And so when we originally started, the Office of Research in the Medical School said, well, it's really such a pain point for researchers to find out feasibility for a trial, or if there's going to be a retrospective cohort, it takes them months and months to get the data. What if we set up a unit in the Office of Research that helped accelerate the time of regulatory review once the IRB approves something to the researcher actually doing the analysis? And so that's where we came in to fill the gap. In the past, people were manually looking at medical records, whether they were paper or EMR. They were combing through them to find eligible participants or to find certain data elements to answer a retrospective cohort study. So we created some tools to help researchers much more quickly get to that. So the main one you may know is Data Direct, and that's a Michigan homegrown tool where you can sit at your desk and interrogate millions of patients' data only to the level of identifiability that's allowed. And so you could do this today without IRB. And the tool would allow you to see cohorts and summary level data. So you could say how many patients are over age 40, had a knee replacement in the last 2 years, and are on these three medications. And it would say, there's 600 of them. Here's the race breakdown, sex, age. Here's what insurance they're on. All right, it sounds like we have enough to go here. With IRB, you can actually export data sets to a secure location where you can actually get row level data, again, only in accordance with what Section 25 that Amanda just talked about said that you were allowed to have. If you don't need names, you don't need phone numbers, you're not going to contact them, that will be grayed out in the Data Direct tool. So the Data Direct tool is interfaced directly on the back end with the e-research application. So whatever boxes you click, the Data Direct tool either enables or disables access to those data. If you want at a later date, not during the seminar, but if you want at a later date for me to walk through your particular research request with you or sit with some faculty you know who are struggling with this, I'm happy to do so. Um, and we tell them just take your time filling out a research application in IRB because it really determines what you can or can't do with the tools. Um, so yeah, I'm happy to sit down with anyone and show them features of this. So let me give you a couple examples so you can think in the levels of from a human research protection perspective. These are real examples from working with people in our community. So one was no IRB. A researcher was just interested to see is there a difference in hypertension between men and women who have existing genome data. So genomic data, that's part of the Michigan Genomics Initiative. How many patients with genetic data that they've consented to have analyzed have hypertension? Can I see a difference between men and women? I don't have IRB yet, so there was summary data. And the researcher was able to see, yes, there are sex differences going on with hypertensive patients. Let's look at the genetic level. So she went on to get a full IRB, but this just gave her enough of an idea to go forward. This was an example of kind of a health equity study, just that was born out of pure observation in labor and delivery when um, a, a researcher, a clinician said, I feel like we're sending meconium drug screening for more Black women than we are white women. I don't know. I just feel like it, regardless of what the history of drug use is, regardless of any laboratory testing, I just feel like we're maybe, not even thinking, but we're sending more of these. And there was a difference in newborn drug screening rates based on the mother's race alone when all else was. And so he was able to do this with his team using Data Direct. Very simple, very impactful. It's been duplicated at other medical centers to see if there are also kind of that that bias underline who we screen, who we don't. Very simple, very impactful study done in Data Direct. A third was Elliot Tapper, who's a successful researcher here, and he had a clinical trial, and he was approved for IRB to email participants. He had an initial waiver to email participants about involvement in a new trial he had. He knew who was eligible, so he just uploaded into the Data Direct tool a list of MRNs, output their email addresses, and within an hour, he was sending notices to eligible participants to be in his trial. That was a third use of the tool. If you haven't used the eMERS tool, another tool that's grown that was developed in-house at Michigan by David Hanauer. This is a tool that helps researchers search the unstructured data. So think about discharge summaries, radiology reports, pathology reports. A lot of the eligibility for cancer studies, for example, really has to do with the histology, the pathology of a given cancer or of a circulating tumor. And not that doesn't all make it to structured fields that you can easily pull in Data Direct. And so the eMERS tool was the regulatory aspects of it were mirrored Data Direct. So David built an interface with IRB. So when you log in, you see a list of HUME numbers for which you're a study team member on, and only if the fullest level of identifiability has been approved can you get into eMERS and do searching. And the two systems, eMERS and Data Direct, talk to each other, so you can send a cohort from Data Direct to eMERS and then look within those patient notes for eligibility for a study or for your power your prospective analyses. These are all behind the firewall. This is all within Michigan Medicine's firewall, and there are multiple levels of authentication when you log into these tools. So it looks at peers training, it looks at IRB, it looks at level 2, and then we also have other attestations that users need to sign about ethical use of these tools and how they will and will not be shared. So these are only successful not because of their technical abilities. We're always trying to improve on those, but really because of the levels of security that wrap around them that make a researcher confident I'm not getting into something I shouldn't. These are actually much safer from a privacy and human subject protections perspective than just accessing everything in my chart and searching for what you need, because then you have access to everything. A great example of an EMER study that query that someone did was they were looking for prostate cancer patients who had a particular Gleason score over 8. That is not something that's in a structured field, in a flow sheet, in my chart. It really is just mentioned in the notes. And so this quickly brought up all the patients who might be eligible for a particular trial the researcher was doing. So those were mainly tools to help researchers who are IRB approved get access to electronic health record data for research, but we know increasingly there are so many additional types of data about human subjects that we may fairly easily have access to, but whether or not the patient has consented or whether or not we can ethically access it and link it to the data we have at Michigan Medicine is what we're looking at now. And this is a lot of area for governance. So just a quick peek ahead before I finish. Um, we're trying to say like the services we initially had and the data types we initially made available to the research community are evolving because your use of data and tools is evolving. And so there's a lot of talk right now, as you all know, on use of AI, development of predictive models, machine learning. And so again, wrapping all of the human subjects protections and compliance security around the development of these models is critical. Making sure they're on closed systems, not open chat GPT, things like that. And so we're trying to look at how researchers at Michigan Medicine, in the College of Engineering, at School of Public Health, can really do advanced predictive model validation and refinement, but not open any risk to identification or harm to patients. If you think about data like wearables data that are coming from a monitor you're wearing or your Apple Watch, there are thousands and thousands of data elements a second that are collected. Those are huge. And so they're ripe for analyzing with advanced data techniques like AI, but there's also a need for storing them in a secure place. And so that's what we're working on now. We're also converting, if anyone needs this for a grant, a lot of NIH multi-center grants are requesting that data be in an OMOP or fire standard. And so we've now mapped all of Michigan Medicine data to that standard. And so if you're participating in a multi-center grant or even a federated data network for research, where data aren't going from institution to institution, but code is, you might need, or you might be supporting researchers who need their data in OMOP or in FHIR. And we now have that centrally mapped so each team doesn't have to do it separately. We have the highest level of security around our new data resources, and we're trying to future-proof them as more and more advanced uses of data and big compute start. We're trying to make sure that our infrastructure is ready for that. So while we're doing all this high-tech development and making sure we're making sure that we're providing to the research community tools and data that can keep our researchers competitive, we're also making sure patients are aware that their data are being used for research, that it's being done in the most private and ethical ways. They may be contacted. And so there's a campaign called Together for Tomorrow that is just starting. And in the hospital and clinic settings, there are posters that say, you came here for the great care that you received because patients before you approved the use of their data and tissue, and now you pay it forward for cures for tomorrow. And so it's rather than hiding the fact that we use data for research, it's really celebrating it and saying, with all the talk in the general public about buying and selling of data and things like that. We're really using it to advance health and wellness. And we're not hiding it, that that's how U of M is using it. What we don't know right now, and you may all be struggling with this too, is what all these new advanced uses of data and AI tools mean for the changing workforce. Will we still need as many data cleaners, data pullers, data reviewers? I think at all times we'll always need a human to say, there are no PHI in this, or yes, this is a good, this prediction model resulted in a valid finding. I can validate it against the source. So I really am excited to not scare my team and say it's all going to AI, but say we're really going to need the human in the loop more than ever. So I just want to close by reminding everyone that while we really started with medical data, genetic data, we're increasingly getting more of a full picture about our patients, which will really help us understand better what makes them sick, what keeps them well, and it'll really help us out. But we know that even if all those data sets we provide are de-identified, together you can really begin to triangulate and identify who someone is. So we ask that even de-identified data sets be treated as if there's identifiability. So I put some final links here in the presentation, but the end is just our consultation. And if you just send us a note that you'd like to meet with us, that's probably the fastest way to get to us. But thank you guys so much. And I think there's Q&A at the end, maybe.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you, Erin. And then I'm going to share a few slides. I always do. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about HIPAA and privacy training opportunities. I skipped ahead on the slide before, but I'm also going to talk about institutional policies around human research and some emerging issues, sort of piggybacking off of Erin's presentation. So I really wanted to quickly show some existing HIPAA training opportunities. Sorry about that. To piggyback off of Amanda's presentation, to make sure that you're aware that in Cornerstone, which requires level 2 access, you can access HIPAA training through there, and there's instructions here. You would log into the portal and then search for the HIPAA modules using the PRIV or PRIV privacy shortened acronym. There's also University of Michigan HIPAA training available to those without level 2 access, which you can access currently in MyLink. That will be moving to a new platform, but for now you can access that through MyLink and access HIPAA training through there. And then the HRPP has 2 UMITEs on the topics related to HIPAA waivers. And so there's one on PHI, protected health information, and one on requirements and waivers for the short bite information about those topics. So next I wanted to talk more broadly about research data privacy requirements at the university. So data protection is a shared responsibility at the university. Per policy, all U of M faculty, staff, and students have a shared responsibility to safeguard university resources against theft, compromise, or inappropriate use. And so this is beyond legal compliance with HIPAA, FERPA, or any other federal regulations or state regulations. Securing data is about respecting participant privacy, and also it allows us to maintain public trust. Proactive data security ensures uninterrupted research and protects the participants, the researcher, and the institution. So within ITS, there is a safe computing guide, and within it, it offers classification of data so that you know which systems or software are appropriate for your data level classification for protection. So low classification would be public or standard data. Moderate would be data requiring standard protections against compromise. And highly sensitive is that those data driven by strict legal or regulatory requirements such as the HIPAA protected PHI. An example of moderate would be unpublished research data and de-identified human subjects research data, whereas low classification would be general, non-sensitive research data specifically classified as low by the researcher. So the sensitive data guide requires that you define your needs. So are you collecting data, processing data, storing or sharing research data, and what software or tools do you need to carry out those needs? Then you would consult the guide, use the sensitive data guide to match the data classification with the permitted software, and then implement controls using the catalog for minimum security requirements and determining the appropriate data protection mechanisms for the tools you use. And describing these protections and the use of the appropriate software is an important thing to address in your application to the IRB so that they can match the data sensitivity level with appropriate mechanisms in their review for protecting the data. If a tool is listed as permitted for your data type, you can assume that you are aligned with U of M information assurance policies by using that data. And of course, if you have questions and you're not sure whether something is in compliance with the sensitive data guide, you would ask. And you can reach out to information assurance for guidance. So the specific university policies for secure handling of U of M information resources is related to ITS policies and the sensitive data guide. But we start with three main university policies for protecting data. The first is the responsible use of information resources. This policy establishes that there are expectations for ethical, legal, and safe use of University of Michigan's information technology services. This applies again to all faculty, staff, and students, affiliates, alumni, regardless of whether you're on campus or using a personal device if you are accessing university systems or handling university data. IT resources are primarily provided to support the university's academic, research, clinical, and administrative missions, but they must be used responsibly. The next policy is privacy and the need to monitor and access records. So this policy defines the balance between the university's respect for employee privacy and occasional necessity to access records or monitor systems used to store them. Access to these records are generally permitted when there is a legitimate business need, defined as any reason necessary to conduct normal university business, and the legitimate business need must be held by the individual whose job responsibilities require them to know the specific information that's being accessed. And then the third policy for information security is one that establishes a framework for protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the university's systems and data. This policy is designed to balance, again, the need for robust security with the university's mission to maintain an open environment for innovation and global collaboration. Technology and platform neutral. So this applies to all technology in whichever platform, and it applies to Ann Arbor campus, Michigan Medicine, Dearborn, and Flint campuses, and all university affiliates, faculty, staff, and workforce members. And so basically all institutional data must be protected based on its level of sensitivity and its criticality to the university. So I have a couple of case studies to sort of highlight the appropriateness of complying with these policies. So if a clinical researcher at Michigan Medicine is collaborating with a colleague at another university to quickly share a data set that contains PHI, they upload the files to a personal consumer-grade Dropbox account because it is familiar and easy for them to use. The problem with this is the use of a personal consumer-grade cloud account. So Dropbox and other software that are listed on the university's Safe Computing Guide are only appropriate if you're using the university's instance of these software tools. So in this scenario, the clinical researcher has bypassed the university's legal and ethical obligation to protect data confidentiality. And the process by which the PHI was shared did not include any necessary security agreements and controls for sharing that data outside of the university. The appropriate alternate scenario would be to use the sensitive data guide to identify and select a U-M approved tool, specifically cleared for the use of this type of data, here it's PHI, and also ensuring that it's complying with the 60107 SPG, which requires adherence to all laws governing the protection of institutional data. In this case, meaning that there would be some kind of agreement in place to share that data outside of the university. For case study 2, we have a social science researcher conducting sensitive, identifiable human subjects research. They classify the data as moderate because they believe it isn't medical in nature. Based on this classification, they store the data on a standard departmental server not rated for high sensitive data. So the problem here is the misclassification of the sensitive, identifiable human subjects research data, rather than the required high classification according to the ITA sensitive data guide. Therefore, because of the misclassification, they failed to implement the mandatory minimum security requirements for this type of data. So they should correctly classify the data as high and use the catalog to identify the appropriate minimum security software that can be used with this type of data. And for guidance, again, as I mentioned, if they were unsure, they should consult ITS Information Assurance or the IRB early in the research planning process so that they're using the appropriate tools. So if a faculty member uses their personally owned laptop to analyze a research data set containing sensitive student information protected by FERPA, the laptop is not encrypted and lacks a strong password. It is stolen from a local coffee shop. The problem here is the storage of sensitive FERPA protected data on a device that's unencrypted and doesn't have a secure password. This violates the responsibility to be a good steward of university resources. They failed to follow published security guidance to ensure the device was adequately protected. The remedy would be, if you are using a personally owned device, that you ensure that that device is adequately protected through encryption and strong passwords. And then once the theft occurs, which could be unavoidable, you're required to promptly report the incident as an IT security incident. And then the final case study is an example where a lead researcher suddenly leaves the university. Their department needs to access the research data and related emails stored in their U-M account to fulfill a legitimate business need. Specifically, they need to comply with a federal grant's data retention requirements for keeping that data. The problem is accessing a departed employee's account or their records without following the formal university standards, and that's considered misconduct. It's a violation of SPG 60111, which requires access to records for purposes that are based on a university need, and then not establishing such standards for access. So in this scenario, the department should demonstrate a legitimate business need defined as any reason necessary to conduct normal university business to access those records. Then they would follow the standards for accessing and monitoring records outlined in the policy 60111 to ensure access is authorized and respects the privacy framework of the university. And so next, as I mentioned, to follow up sort of on Erin's later slides, I just wanted to talk a little bit about privacy and confidentiality with, emerging issues. And so it's good to hear that the doctor office is also thinking about these things and preparing to support researchers. But of course, AI is an emerging issue where privacy is of concern. And so this is just a quick image of artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and generative AI, just as an introduction to what we're talking about. And then also there's large-scale data repositories that share and store substantial amounts of research data, often from many participants in studies, and they can greatly support discovery by enabling reuse, replication, and broader analysis. So some key privacy concerns with AI use in research is identifiability. Even when data is determined to be de-identified in the beginning of a project, that data may sometimes be re-identified when combined with other data sets. There's concerns about sensitive information where participant data may be entered into AI tools that might store, reuse, or access that data by third parties, depending on which AI platform is being used. And I think Erin alluded to this as well. There's consent limitations. Participants may not have agreed to their data being used with AI systems or for model training. And we have to question whether consent is meaningful in some of these cases when there's future use. Of course, there's data security when researchers have to handle data in approved secure environments and being aware of the AI platform that's in use and whether or not it's considered secure and where that data might end up in the future. And then, of course, there's concerns with the results of using AI when there might be inaccurate or flawed results due to bias, or the results might reveal or infer sensitive traits such as health status, identity, behavior, or demographics that wasn't anticipated. So AI used in human participant research can raise these concerns about adequate informed consent, whether it's meaningful, whether it's possible to minimize risk, data security, and then protecting privacy. The key privacy concerns with large-scale data repositories, again, is the re-identification risk. So again, even when data is considered to be de-identified, it may be linked with other data sets to identify individuals. There's the sensitive data concern, consent limitations, when participants may not have agreed to broad future use, sharing, or secondary analysis, and whether that data can be pulled back or out, so to speak. Access controls, the repositories have to restrict who can access data and under what conditions. There's data security for large data sets that are concerning. These are attractive targets for breaches or misuse, for the sale or misuse of those data. And then there could be group harms when there's large data sets, which you might result in findings that stigmatize or disadvantage communities, even when individuals are not identified in the data. So AI, machine learning, generative AI, and these large-scale data repositories are emerging issues in human research because both enable or involve really big and powerful analysis that we haven't seen before. And then the reuse of data, the sharing of the data, inevitably increases privacy risks. So these are great tools for research. However, they combine or infer sensitive information about people and make re-identification possible. So use of these tools raise concerns about whether participants can provide meaningful consent when it comes to the future use of this data. And so that's the end of my summary of all of that. I really appreciate Amanda and Erin's presentations, really practical information that I hope was helpful, and a good look at the future in terms of where we're looking ahead to. So if we have questions, I'll stop sharing so that we can get to those. I believe we have one. So feel free to chime in if you have any other questions. And if we don't receive any other questions, we'll end early, but feel free to reach out if you find that you have questions when you re-review the slides or the recording or they come to you later. I think the takeaway here is that we have expertise in the IRBs, both the IRBs, expertise in the doctor office and these other units that support, human research. So if you have questions, please reach out. I'm sure there's, an expert or some resource that can be available to you to help. So, Erin, this question is for you. Are any of these tools that you described available broadly at U of M, or is it just Michigan Medicine?
Oh, that's a great question. So the um, Data Direct tool is available with more broadly for a level one user. And so that has been available for a couple years now that some of our collaborators in social work or Ross School of Business who do IRB approved health research need access to Data Direct, but the data underlying the de-identified data direct is all de-identified. Well, I should say it's coded. It's got a unique identifier, not the medical record, and all the dates have been shifted in one of several ways. But there is a version of the tool that is available to someone who doesn't have level two credentials.
Thank you. That is a good question and good to know. We do have another question. So for Erin, in eMERS, are you searching by key terms?
Yes. So you guys might have heard of NLP, natural language processing, in which a free text word or string is converted into a coded field. That's not what eMERS is. eMERS is really a text searching tool. So that's exactly what you do with this person just mentioned is you put in a keyword. You can put in negation. So you can put in, I'm looking for dizziness, not lightheadedness, or you can put in negation, you can put in a whole string of a sentence you're looking for. eMERS also will pull up misspellings or acronyms. So if you're interested in hypertension, it will also bring in HTN or high blood pressure. So it's got all the synonyms built in because a lot of it comes from dictations or someone's typed notes. There could be misspellings and things. So the tool really takes the keywords you're interested in, and then has suggestions of like, it probably could be described like this also in the notes. So it's pretty incredible.
Thanks. And the question answerer said this is very cool. So that's all the questions we received so far. We might be able to end early if nothing else pops up. But again, I thank you so much, Amanda and Erin, for your presentations. We will provide the slides and a recording. And we do have one more question, a late breaking question. So does the content and the study consent and HIPAA consent forms overlap? That is, are there required redundancies between those that are or are not required? And so, Amanda, I think this would be for you.
Yeah, I think that's combined, it's not, there isn't redundant information, but it's ensured that all of the information is available there to to what's the word I'm looking for?
Inform?
Meet the criteria for the valid HIPAA authorization form. So basically, you're required, the element of consent is requiring to tell the participants what's happening with their data, but then the HIPAA authorization portion is the details.
Great, thank you. Okay, so there's one other question for me about the infographic visual of AI. That there is a link to that in the slide, so you'll be able to link to that and see where that was from, where that was sourced. So I'll make sure to provide the slides and that hyperlink will work so you can see where that's from. But yes, I thought that was very a good, helpful depiction of how to understand AI and its relation to the subsets of AI. Okay, so do our speakers have any other comments that they want to provide? If not, we will end at this moment. And again, thank you so much for your presentations. Thank you to the audience for attending, and please reach out if you have questions. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.